The Rush game mode is one that Battlefield players of games gone past, specifically Bad Company 2 and Battlefield 3, they hold that game mode quite dear. Now, it's been a long time now, coming up to 7 years since the end of Battlefield 3's support, and that was really the last time that we saw a properly decent implementation of the game mode. Battlefield 4's map design just didn't lend itself to good layouts, and the Commander UAV scan would just ruin all flanks within an instant. Battlefield Hardline didn't feature the game mode, and Battlefield 1 reduced the player count to 12v12, implemented artillery strike call-ins on the MCOM locations, which just smashed attackers who were spotted and completely unable to defend themselves from the explosions. So it's safe to say that the magic of the game mode has been almost completely destroyed at this point, but DICE is going to try again with Battlefield 5. Rush launched just a couple of days ago. Is it any better here? Well, I've got some opinions. Let's start off first of all with some of the good things that Rush does in Battlefield 5. Firstly, the map selection. DICE chose probably the 3 best maps they could have, considering only 9 are currently on offer for them to use. Devastation, Narvik and Twisted Steel do offer 3 very different approaches to Rush, and each of them does a pretty good job of supporting the game mode. Devastation, with its tight roads, alleyways and tall buildings, makes for this really blocky layout, and that suits a Rush game mode quite well. A mix of destructible and non-destructible cover means that attackers can use different lanes to advance up to the objective locations without getting stuck at a choke point. However, on this map, I do think some of the objective locations need a little bit of a look at, as sometimes as an attacker you're sort of going through a maze to get there, and there are lots of places that the defenders can hide. Now, Narvik flips this idea, and it's much more open, but it's still somewhat restricted to the layout of different lanes. All the destructible buildings up in the town area, they're put to good use as cover for the defending team, and then cover for the attackers as they advance through after taking a sector. Only the top part of the map is used, and that suits the mode quite well, condensing the infantry, and it makes the threat of an advancing tank that much higher. And Twisted Steel is the most open of the 3, and I think it's the one that could do with the most tweaking, but I'll talk about that in another part of the video. You start by advancing up to the line of the bridge, down the other side, and then you move through the swamp. I think most of us thought that DICE would use the bridge directly in their Rush layout, but it's not actually used at all, and to be honest, I don't really mind that. Another good thing that Rush does here in Battlefield 5 is the overall pacing. The distance between the attacker spawns and the MCOM locations isn't too far in general, which means action is always happening. There's never really a lull in the fighting, and this makes the maps feel much more alive and atmospheric, which is nice coming from other maps that are literally lifeless and make you feel depressed. I'm talking about you, Rotterdam. The defenders obviously have the advantage in almost every sector, but that's the way this game mode should be. Rush is inherently asymmetric, where when you attack, you're going against the odds, whereas the defenders simply need to hold their position and kill you to win. That feeling is quite good here in Battlefield 5. Multiple times we'd push forward, clear out an area and arm an objective, and think we'd secured it, only to have 2 or 3 defenders rock up together, smoke the place out, eliminate us, and then take back control. So the push and pull of the game mode was working quite well in most rounds that I played. And something else that's good, the speed and the slickness of player movement in Battlefield 5, that really suits the Rush game mode. And it's something that people often forget about when new game modes come along. They have to work well with what is already present in the game, and with all the improvements that DICE has made recently to the vaulting and the collision with small objects, those frantic fights around the objective, arming, disarming, it feels really slick and really fluid, which is great. Rush is a very chaotic game mode, and the closer you get to the objectives, the more the tension builds. So it's nice that the game isn't holding you back at all. It's not stopping you from having a good experience in that regard. So at a base level, literally looking at the game mode and how it should be played, Rush here is pretty good in Battlefield 5. It functions well, and it plays on the 3 maps that DICE chose without too many issues. But going into a little bit more detail, what's not so great about Rush in Battlefield 5? I've got a few things that I think we need to talk about. Firstly, the actual objectives themselves can sometimes cause a little bit of an issue, but only certain ones. DICE has elected to get rid of the iconic MCOM stations that they've used since Bad Company 2, and has replaced them with something more thematic. So in Battlefield 5 they've chosen artillery cannons and radio stations. The radio stations, they're fine, not an issue, but the artillery cannons, I don't believe are the best choice, because they're absolutely massive, first of all, and second, they're not fully placed on the ground, and this means that enemy defenders can camp their location, prone, hidden away somewhere, and they can shoot your feet right out from under it when you're going through the animation of arming the explosive. As an attacker, you want to get in and out as fast as you can, and often that means just running right up to the objective and arming without fully checking. And the disadvantage now is that the objective is so damn large, you can't quickly scan the area for enemies. And with Rush being a fast-paced mode, I'm not sure it fits too well. Next, I want to talk about the size of some of the sectors. Twisted Steel is by far the worst offender here, and what I'm referring to is the overall width of the sectors, the distance to the side of the objectives, basically. Now, Narvik don't really have a problem there. All of the sectors are really nicely built, and there's one on Devastation, I think it's the second sector, where you approach the cathedral, that has a really wide front line, and the attackers can come through, I think, one of 4 entrances to the cathedral, and that makes it really difficult for the defenders to know where the attackers might be coming from. It's not as predictable as I think it should be, but here on Twisted Steel, when each sector resembles a rectangle like this one, you're severely limiting the movement of the attacking team and the defenders. The defenders have no room to really spread forwards to stem the flow of the attackers, and their spawn is right behind the MCOM locations, or the objective locations. That makes it really hard for the attackers. And for the attackers it's really difficult as well, because they have to run all the way from the back of the sector to arm the objectives right in front of the enemy spawn. They are just a little bit too close. Here, sometimes you just end up with 2 flat lines of teams facing off against each other. Previous maps like Damavan Peak, for example, here's an image on the screen, they use a narrower shape to help funnel the gameplay towards the different objectives. But they put more distance between the boundary areas and the objectives as well, incorporating more cover for the attackers to sort of bunch up behind, and then they can sort of make forward moves from there. As I said, this is really only an issue on Twisted Steel, and I think it can be easily fixed by changing the locations of the objectives and bringing them slightly closer to the attackers to allow for just a little bit more movement. Also, the animations for arming and disarming objectives, not really sure why those actually exist other than to make the game look pretty. When arming the objective, as soon as you hit the interact button, you are locked into an animation which stops you from firing your gun. You can spin around and you can look, but you're totally stuck in the animation that you hit the button for. Unless you depress it, then you get access to your gun again, but you might actually need to disarm or arm that objective because you are playing the objective. That's the point of the game mode. It's really a bad mechanic in my opinion, and it needs to be totally removed from this mode. Just get rid of those animations. I don't see any place for them. You go to arm the objective and then you're unable to defend yourself. So DICE has made a decision to prioritise this physicality direction that they're going for, showing you what you're actually doing and putting emphasis on all of those different actions, rather than focusing on good, fun gameplay experiences. And this is part of the reason why the more I play Battlefield 5, the more I'm starting to dislike this physicality pillar and the effect on the game. It's just wearing me down a little bit. I think it would be best if we went back to Battlefield 3 and 4 days of arming objectives, just a simple circle completion timer that can activate whilst you're not looking at the objective. That way you can look around, you can hold your weapon, and you can protect yourself. And by the way, I'm annoyed about a lot of the other animations in Battlefield 5 as well, and I'm actually thinking about doing a separate video on physicality and why it's not a good thing for Battlefield 5, and moving forward for the franchise, I think it would be best if we let physicality go. Another thing I noticed, Rush really exposes some of the balancing issues that Battlefield 5 has. I played about 2.5 hours worth of Rush yesterday and a few matches today as well. The teams were wildly imbalanced in some of the matches that I played. We steamrolled other teams, either defending and not letting the attackers take the first sector, or just blasting through the defences and winning the match, taking all the sectors quite quickly. I think DICE needs to take another look at their team balancer and see if there's anything they can do to try and improve it a bit more. And lastly, why do the objectives still have artillery call-ins that can be activated by the defenders? This implementation of Rush was supposed to be a classic one, which didn't include artillery on the objectives at all. That feature was added with Battlefield 1, and for me it ruined the game mode by just hounding spotted players with unavoidable explosive fire on their position. It was indirect fire that they could not counter. Sure, its impact is somewhat lessened here by the fact that 3D spotting is so infrequent in Battlefield 5, thus the artillery doesn't really know where to strike, but still, a big piece of feedback from BF1 Rush was that people didn't like the artillery, and somehow that feature is still here in Battlefield 5. DICE, please, can you get rid of it? Oh, and just to tack on to the end, since we're talking about artillery, the new squad reinforcement that squad leaders can call in artillery strikes, I think that needs to be looked at. I don't think it should be removed from the game mode, but the way it's implemented right now is just a little bit obnoxious. The camera shake that the strike enforces upon you and every other player, with no way to counter it, is just bad. And I think it lasts too long as well. With it costing around 17,000 points, a squad can build that up by the second or third sector of Rush, and what you find is a similar situation to Conquest, where at the end of the round, everyone calls in their V1 rockets, one after the other. The problem here in Rush is that you've got a smaller amount of players and a smaller play area, so the artillery just absolutely dominates it. So instead of it becoming this denial of entry tool, it completely grinds gameplay to a halt and just is not fun to experience. It's poorly balanced, it's poorly implemented, and I think DICE needs to look at it fairly quickly before it becomes a wider issue on the smaller game modes. And also, when the enemy is calling in an artillery strike, it'd be nice to see that area of effect on the minimap, and maybe even an audio cue that comes over saying, the enemy's launched an artillery strike, take cover. That way we actually know if an artillery strike is about to hit us, because right now, you get absolutely no warning at all. So, overall, in its current state, I'd have to give Battlefield 5 Rush a 6 out of 10. The basis is decent, and I feel that we've got some of that Bad Company 2 Battlefield 3 magic back, especially with Narvik. Narvik is actually really good on Rush, but they then sprinkled it with a bunch of stuff from Battlefield 4, like the super wide sectors, and then Battlefield 1 with the objective artillery that has somewhat marred the experience. If they could ditch those arming and disarming animations and remove the artillery that you call in from the objectives as defenders, then I think they'd be closer to an experience that players would want to come back to. I really like the Rush game mode, and probably will play this game mode now until it disappears in a couple of weeks, but once it does go away, I imagine DICE are going to make some changes. I think they've got a good mode on their hands for the future, but it does need some tweaking. If they can make some of those changes, then it would probably increase my score to an 8 out of 10. With that being said, you should probably give it a go, because it's the game mode you have to play for this week's Tides of War unlock, so if you don't play it, you don't get the new plane. But thanks very much for watching today. That was Rush in Battlefield 5. Let me know your thoughts on the game mode down below in the comments section. Are you liking it so far? Are you kind of in the middle, or do you not like it at all? Let me know some of your thoughts. But until next time, my name is Westie, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.